Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the heart of Imperial China. But we're not going for a serene walk through ancient temples. Instead, we're pulling back the silken drapes on the horrifying power struggles of the Ming Dynasty. Imagine yourself stepping into the dust-filled, yet meticulously ordered, world of 14th century China. You're not just admiring jade artifacts, you're breathing in the heavy scent of incense mixed with the metallic tang of ambition, feeling the stiff silk of official robes, and knowing that beneath the surface of imperial grandeur, a constant, brutal battle for power is raging. This isn't some calm historical documentary, this is a real-life epic of betrayal, purges, and the chilling ruthlessness required to build and maintain an empire. Seriously, if you were an official in the Ming court, your life expectancy would probably depend on how well you could read the emperor's moods and how quickly you could eliminate your rivals before they eliminated you. Trust me, you probably wouldn't survive a single season. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in the mid-14th century, a time of immense turmoil in China. The ruling Yuan Dynasty, established by the Mongols, is crumbling. You see widespread corruption, natural disasters like devastating floods and famines, and increasingly brutal repression. These factors ignite a widespread wave of peasant rebellions across the vast empire. The air is thick with desperation and the cries of the suffering populace, creating a chaotic landscape ripe for revolution. Among the myriad of rebel groups that emerge, one figure, seemingly an unlikely candidate, begins to rise above all others: Zhu Yuanzhang. You observe him not as a general born into nobility, but as a truly humble, utterly destitute peasant. He endures unimaginable hardship, orphaned by plague, forced into a Buddhist monastery just to survive starvation, and then cast out to beg. You feel the raw, desperate hunger that must have driven his early life, forging in him an iron will and a deep-seated suspicion of authority. It's like watching a real-life rags-to-riches story, but with a terrifyingly ruthless edge. Zhu Yuanzhang quickly joins one of the many rebel groups, the Red Turban Rebellion, an organization with Buddhist and Manichaean influences that promise the overthrow of the Mongols. You witness his extraordinary natural leadership emerge. He is charismatic, highly intelligent, and possesses an uncanny ability to attract loyal followers and organize disparate forces. He doesn't just fight, he learns, meticulously studying military tactics and political strategy, absorbing lessons from every victory and defeat. He distinguishes himself not only through his martial prowess, but also through his discipline and his surprisingly effective administration of the territories he conquers. Unlike many other rebel leaders who plundered the populace, Zhu Yuanzhang often sought to protect civilians and restore order, earning him popular support as his power grows. Zhu Yuanzhang faces a new, terrifying challenge, not just the Mongols, but the numerous rival rebel leaders vying for control of China. You see him engage in a brutal, no-holds-barred struggle for supremacy against other formidable warlords, each with their own armies and ambitions. This period is marked by relentless campaigns, cunning stratagems, and horrifying betrayals. He makes alliances, breaks them, and systematically eliminates anyone who stands in his path. This isn't a gentleman's war, it's a fight for survival, where only the most ruthless and cunning will prevail. His victory against his primary rival, Chen Yuliang, at the Battle of Poyang Lake in 1363 is a pivotal moment. You witness one of the largest naval battles in history, a colossal clash that lasts for weeks. Zhu Yuanzhang, despite being initially outnumbered, uses superior tactics and daring maneuvers to utterly annihilate Chen Yuliang's fleet. This decisive victory removes his most formidable competitor and paves the way for his final push against the Mongols. You feel the sheer scale of the conflict, the immense human cost, and the profound strategic genius that secured his dominance. By 1368, Zhu Yuanzhang, having defeated all internal rivals and driven the last Yuan emperor from Dadu, modern-day Beijing, proclaims the establishment of a new dynasty, the Ming Dynasty, meaning brilliant or bright. He takes the imperial title of the Hongwu Emperor. You witness his coronation, a grand ceremony that signifies the return of native Chinese rule after nearly a century of Mongol domination. He establishes his capital at Nanjing, on the Yangtze River, a strategic location that reflects his southern origins. However, the horrifying power struggles that define the Ming Dynasty truly begin with its founder, the Hongwu Emperor. Having risen from the lowest ranks of society and experienced profound hardship, carries deep-seated paranoia and a relentless distrust of anyone who might threaten his hard-won power. You see him, a brilliant and capable ruler, yet one who becomes increasingly tyrannical and suspicious. Driven by a profound insecurity about his legitimacy and the stability of his newly founded empire, his paranoia leads to a series of devastating purges. He meticulously eliminates anyone he perceives as a threat, particularly the very generals and officials who helped him achieve victory. You witness the chilling efficiency of his secret police, the Jinyue embroidered uniform guard, who operate outside the regular legal system, conducting arrests, torture, and executions without trial. Thousands of individuals, including many of his most loyal and capable former comrades, are implicated in alleged conspiracies and ruthlessly executed, often along with their entire families. The scale of these purges is terrifying, extending far beyond the immediate accused to their relatives, servants, and even distant acquaintances. It's like watching a king systematically prune his garden, but instead of plants, he's cutting down everyone who helped him plant the seeds. One famous and particularly brutal example is the Hu Weiyang case in 1380. Hu Weiyang was the Grand Counselor, a powerful chief minister, the Hongwu Emperor, increasingly distrustful of concentrated power, accused Hu Weiyang of treason and executed him, along with tens of thousands of his supposed associates. Stretching over many years, this case, arguably fabricated or grossly exaggerated by the emperor, became a pretext for abolishing the position of Grand Counselor altogether, centralizing all power directly in the emperor's hands. This is the horrifying truth of the Ming founder. He was a brilliant military leader and administrator who systematically dismantled existing power structures and eliminated any potential rivals, creating a highly centralized, autocratic state where the emperor's will was absolute. Historians still debate the true motivations behind the Hongwu emperor's purges, whether they were genuinely a response to perceived threats, or a deliberate strategy to eliminate potential opposition and create an unprecedented level of imperial control. The Hongwu emperor's reign lays the foundation for many of the darker aspects of Ming rule. His reliance on eunuchs for internal administration, his use of secret police, and his profound distrust of the scholarly bureaucracy, the literati, would become recurring themes in later Ming power struggles. He centralized power to an unprecedented degree, creating a system where the emperor's personal character, whether brilliant or indolent, would have a direct and immediate impact on the fate of the entire empire. By the time of his death in 1398, the Hongwu emperor has created a vast, powerful, and culturally vibrant empire. He has rebuilt China after decades of war, established a strong centralized government, and initiated widespread economic recovery. However, he also leaves a legacy of profound paranoia, fear, and a chilling precedent for ruthless purges. The empire he founded, built on such terrifying struggles for power, carries within its very foundations the seeds of future conflict, intrigue, and bloodshed, all centered around the absolute, often horrifying, power of the Dragon Throne. You now step through the imposing gates of the Forbidden City, the awe-inspiring Imperial Palace complex in Beijing. And immediately you understand the absolute power of the Ming Dynasty's emperors. This isn't just a collection of buildings, it's a meticulously designed fortress, a symbol of divine authority, and a physical manifestation of the emperor's absolute control over his empire. But beyond its stunning beauty and grandeur, you'll discover that within its secluded, gilded walls, some of the dynasty's darkest and most horrifying power struggles were conceived and executed. You feel the profound silence, punctuated only by the rustle of silk and the distant cries of palace guards. A silence that often concealed the most brutal of secrets. The construction of the Forbidden City itself is a tale of immense ambition and ruthless efficiency. While the Hongwu Emperor established Nanjing as his first capital, it is his fourth son, the Yongle Emperor, who orchestrates the relocation of the capital to Beijing and the monumental undertaking of building this new imperial residence. You witnessed the Yongle Emperor's brutal rise to power. Remember, his usurpation of his nephew's throne means he needs a new grand capital to legitimize his reign and erase the memory of his predecessor. The construction, beginning in 1406 and taking 14 years to complete, involves over 1 million laborers, including skilled artisans and countless conscripted peasants. You see the sheer scale of the undertaking: massive timbers brought from distant forests, enormous stone blocks carved from quarries, all transported by human and animal power across vast distances. The human cost of this monumental project is immense, often involving forced labor and high mortality rates. A chilling reflection of imperial will. It's like building the world's most elaborate and luxurious prison, designed to both inspire awe and enforce absolute isolation. As you walk through the vast courtyards and intricate halls, you begin to grasp the profound symbolism of the Forbidden City. Its very layout reflects the Chinese cosmos and the emperor's role as the Son of Heaven. The central axis runs north to south, aligning with universal harmony, the golden roofs, the elaborate dragon motifs. The number of rooms reportedly 999,999, just shy of the divine 10,000. All are meticulously designed to emphasize the emperor's unique connection to the heavens and his absolute authority on earth. You feel the overwhelming aura of majesty, designed to humble anyone who enters and reinforce the divine right of the Ming emperors, the most horrifying truth about the Forbidden City. However, is its role as a gilded cage, a place of profound seclusion and isolation for the emperor himself, designed to protect him from external threats and public gaze. It also increasingly isolated him from the realities of his vast empire. You observe the emperor, often surrounded by tens of thousands of eunuchs, palace women, and personal servants. Rarely venturing beyond the palace walls, this extreme isolation, while intended to elevate his status, inadvertently created a dangerous power vacuum in the day-to-day running of the government, leading to some of the dynasty's most brutal power struggles. It's like putting the CEO of a massive company in a soundproof, windowless office, making him utterly dependent on those who manage the outside world for him. Within this secluded world, new power centers emerged. The Imperial Household Department Neiwufu, managed by eunuchs, grew exponentially in power. These eunuchs, castrated men who served the imperial family, were uniquely positioned. They were often the emperor's closest confidants, privy to his most private moments and thoughts, and living within the Forbidden City's intimate confines. Unlike civil officials, they had no families to establish competing power bases, theoretically making them more loyal to the emperor alone. However, as the emperors became more isolated, eunuchs gained unprecedented access and influence, often becoming the true intermediaries between the emperor and the outside world. This created a horrifying power struggle between the traditional Confucian, scholar officials, the literati, and the ambitious, often ruthless, eunuch faction. You observe the daily life within the Forbidden City, a world governed by rigid court rituals and a strict hierarchy. Every movement, every conversation, Every meal is meticulously regulated. The emperor is the unquestioned sun around which everything revolves. But his direct engagement with governance can vary wildly from active, diligent rule to profound indifference, leading to significant fluctuations in who wields real power, and intriguing, yet unsettling detail about the Forbidden City is the extensive use of palace women concubines, maids, and attendants who often numbered in the thousands. Their lives were entirely confined within the palace walls, and many would never see the outside world again after entering. Their primary purpose was to serve the emperor and, for the concubines, to produce heirs. Their rivalries for imperial favor and the emperor's attention often led to fierce, sometimes deadly, intrigues behind the scenes. These private power struggles, though largely hidden from public view, could have profound impacts on who gained access to the emperor and thus who could influence dynastic succession. The very design of the Forbidden City, with its massive walls, numerous gates, and labyrinthine passages, also made it an ideal place for confinement and execution. You hear the whispers of secret prisons within its compounds, of officials and palace women summarily executed, their bodies quietly removed to avoid scandal. The privacy and absolute control within the imperial complex allowed emperors, or powerful eunuchs acting in their name, to carry out purges and eliminate rivals with horrifying efficiency. Far from the public eye, the silence of its courtyards could be more chilling than the noise of battle. The horrifying power struggles of the Ming Dynasty often played out in the subtle battles for proximity to the Dragon Throne. Whether it was ambitious eunuchs controlling information flow, ruthless officials vying for imperial favor, or concubines plotting for their sons to be named heir, the Forbidden City became the central arena. The seclusion that was meant to protect the emperor inadvertently made him a prisoner of his own court, dependent on those who controlled his access to the outside world. This created fertile ground for corruption, arbitrary justice, and the rise of individuals who could manipulate the emperor for their own ends. The Forbidden City, therefore, stands as a grand monument to Ming power and culture, a symbol of China's imperial might. But it also serves as a chilling reminder of the dark side of absolute monarchy, the isolation of the ruler, the unchecked power of those closest to him, and the constant, brutal struggle for influence behind closed doors. Its magnificent walls not only protected the emperor, but also concealed a horrifying crucible of ambition and intrigue that profoundly shaped the fate of the Ming Dynasty for centuries. You now delve into one of the most insidious and horrifying power struggles that plagued the Ming Dynasty, the relentless ascent of the eunuchs. These palace servants, often initially seen as harmless functionaries, gradually accumulated immense, often terrifying, influence, frequently surpassing the traditional power of the civil officials, and even, at times, eclipsing the emperor himself. You feel the pervasive shadow they cast over the imperial court, a silent yet formidable force behind the gilded walls of the Forbidden City. The role of eunuchs in Chinese imperial courts dates back centuries. Long before the Ming Dynasty, they were castrated males who served the emperor and his household, trusted precisely because they could not father children and thus, theoretically, could not build independent power bases through dynastic succession. Their loyalty was meant to be solely to the emperor. You observe them in their humble beginnings within the palace, performing intimate duties managing the imperial harem, overseeing palace maintenance, and acting as personal attendants to the emperor. Their unique access to the emperor's private chambers and their constant proximity to him gave them an unparalleled advantage over civil officials, who were often kept at a distance by rigid court protocol. However, it was during the Ming Dynasty that the power of the eunuchs reached its terrifying zenith. The dynasty's founder, the Hongwu Emperor, ironically, laid the groundwork for their rise. You recall his deep-seated paranoia and his brutal purges of the civil bureaucracy. particularly after the abolition of the Grand Counselor position. In his distrust of the scholar officials, he increasingly relied on eunuchs for confidential matters, for overseeing the imperial household department, and even for managing his personal security. He banned eunuchs from learning to read or getting involved in politics. But these prohibitions were gradually ignored after his death. It's like watching someone trying to cut down a forest, but accidentally planting seeds for a new, even more dangerous one. The Yongle Emperor, who seized the throne through a brutal civil war, further cemented eunuch power. You remember his need for loyal, unquestioning servants after his violent usurpation. He massively expanded the eunuch bureaucracy, giving them control over imperial workshops, state monopolies, and, crucially, allowing them to lead naval expeditions like Zheng He's famous voyages, collect taxes, and even serve as spies. You see them becoming the emperor's eyes and ears, operating outside the traditional civil bureaucracy, directly accountable only to him. This dual structure of power, the traditional civil service, the literati, and the rapidly expanding eunuch bureaucracy, created a perennial, horrifying power struggle at the heart of the Ming court. You feel the intense rivalry, the constant maneuvering, and the bitter animosity between these two factions. The civil officials, educated in Confucian classics and proud of their moral integrity, viewed eunuchs as uneducated, corrupt, and morally bankrupt upstarts who wielded undue influence. The eunuchs, for their part, resented the arrogance of the officials and leveraged their unique access to the emperor to undermine their rivals. This conflict often paralyzed governance and led to devastating purges. It's like watching two rival gangs constantly fighting for control of the same territory, with the emperor caught somewhere in the middle. The most insidious aspect of eunuch power was their control over information flow to the emperor, especially as later Ming emperors retreated into the seclusion of the Forbidden City. You observe how eunuchs became the primary conduits of communication between the outer court where civil officials worked and the inner court, the emperor's private residence. They could filter, distort, or outright suppress memorials, official reports from civil officials, ensuring that the emperor only heard what they wanted him to hear. This control over imperial access and information gave them immense leverage, allowing them to promote their allies and destroy their enemies. This ability to manipulate the emperor's perception of reality is a truly disturbing truth of their power. The eunuchs also gained control over the dreaded eastern depot Dongcheng, and later the western depot Xichang. Powerful secret police organizations established to root out corruption and disloyalty. You witness the terrifying power of these agencies, operating outside the normal judicial system. Eunuch directors of the depots commanded vast networks of spies and torturers, arresting officials, generals, and even imperial relatives without warrant, imprisoning them, and extracting confessions through brutal means. You feel the pervasive fear these secret police organizations inspired, creating an atmosphere of terror where no one felt safe from arbitrary arrest and torture. The eunuchs, theoretically serving the emperor, often use these agencies to eliminate their own political rivals and enrich themselves. An intriguing, yet horrifying detail about eunuch power was their ability to amass immense personal wealth. Despite their official status as servants, their control over imperial workshops, state monopolies, land management, and tax collection allowed them to accumulate vast fortunes through corruption and embezzlement. You see them building lavish private residences, maintaining large retinues of personal guards, and engaging in extravagant displays of wealth that often dwarfed that of many noble families. This accumulation of wealth further fueled their power and their ability to bribe officials and influence decisions. The rise of the eunuchs led to periods of profound misgovernance and instability. You witness instances where powerful eunuchs effectively ran the empire, while the emperor remained largely ignorant or indifferent in the Forbidden City. This unchecked power often led to rampant corruption, arbitrary justice, and a decline in administrative efficiency, weakening the dynasty from within. The horrifying power struggles between the eunuchs and the civil officials often resulted in devastating purges. You see periods where thousands of officials were imprisoned, tortured, or executed on trumped-up charges, simply because they dared to challenge a powerful eunuch. This constant internal strife sapped the strength of the Ming government, diverting resources and talent away from critical issues like border defense or economic reform. Historians still debate whether the rise of eunuch power was an inevitable consequence of the Ming emperor's increasing isolation and centralization of power, or if individual powerful eunuchs simply exploited systemic weaknesses for personal gain. By the mid-Ming period, the eunuch faction had become a state within a state, a shadow government operating with terrifying efficiency within the Forbidden City. Their unique position, their control over vital institutions like the secret police and information flow, and their willingness to wield ruthless power made them one of the most feared and influential forces in the empire. This insidious growth of eunuch power is a chilling reminder of how unchecked authority, even when theoretically serving a benevolent ruler, can corrupt and ultimately undermine the very foundations of an empire. Paving the way for eventual collapse, you now delve into the treacherous, blood-soaked arena of imperial succession within the Ming Dynasty. Despite the Hongwu Emperor's meticulous efforts to establish a clear line of descent, the transition of power was rarely smooth, often leading to brutal, often fatal, power struggles and purges that destabilized the empire from within. You feel the chilling anxiety that must have permeated the Forbidden City every time an emperor's health failed. Knowing that the question of who would sit on the Dragon Throne could trigger a wave of political assassinations and familial betrayals. This is the horrifying truth that power, once absolute, demands constant, brutal vigilance, even from within one's own family. The Hongwu Emperor, the dynasty's founder, learned the bitter lessons of instability during his own rise to power, which involved eliminating numerous rivals. Determined to create a stable, enduring dynasty, he established elaborate rules for succession, decreeing that the throne would pass from father to eldest son, or to the eldest grandson if the son predeceased him. He also meticulously trained his designated heir. However, even his iron will could not prevent future conflicts, the first major, and most devastating. Succession struggle occurs immediately after the Hongwu Emperor's death in 1398. He had designated his grandson, Zhu Yunwen, as his heir. Since his own eldest son, Zhu Biao, had died prematurely, you witness Zhu Yunwen ascend the throne as the Jianwen Emperor. He is a young, scholarly, and somewhat idealistic ruler who attempts to centralize power by curtailing the authority of his powerful uncles, the regional princes who had been granted vast military commands by his grandfather. This attempt at reform, however, provokes a catastrophic backlash. His fourth uncle, Zhu Di, Prince of Yan, a formidable military commander based in Beijing, views these reforms as a direct threat to his power and a betrayal of his father's legacy. You feel the simmering resentment and naked ambition that drives Zhu Di. In 1399, he launches a civil war, cynically proclaiming that he is acting to restore proper order and remove corrupt officials who misled the young emperor. This conflict, known as the Jingnan Campaign, plunges the newly founded Ming Dynasty into its first horrifying internal struggle. It's like watching a family feud escalate into a full-blown war. With the entire nation as the battlefield, the Jingnan Campaign is a brutal, 4-year civil war that devastates large swathes of northern China. You witness the immense destruction, the widespread suffering, and the horrific atrocities committed by both sides. Zhu Di is a brilliant and ruthless general, leading his forces with unwavering determination. He eventually marches on Nanjing, The capital. In 1402, his armies breach the city walls. You feel the terror of the final assault, the chaos as the imperial palace is set ablaze. The fate of the Jianwen emperor remains one of the greatest and most chilling mysteries of the Ming Dynasty. As the palace burns. The Jianwen emperor and his immediate family vanish without a trace. Some accounts claim he perished in the fire. His body never found. Others suggest he managed to escape through secret tunnels and lived out his life as a monk, forever wandering the empire in disguise. You feel the profound ambiguity of his disappearance. A powerful symbol of the ruthless lengths to which a usurper would go. This lingering mystery is a truly horrifying truth, a legitimate emperor, erased from history and memory by his own uncle. Historians still debate the true fate of the Jianwen emperor, with no definitive evidence confirming his death or escape, making him an enduring enigma in Chinese history. Judy ascends the throne as the Yongle emperor, a magnificent but equally ruthless ruler. You recall his decision to move the capital to Beijing and construct the Forbidden City, which was partly a means to solidify his illegitimate claim and distance himself from the events in Nanjing. His usurpation sets a dangerous precedent. It shows that the established rules of succession could be overthrown by military might, opening the door for future power struggles. His reign, while a period of immense imperial grandeur and expansion, is also marked by a chilling paranoia. He relentlessly purges any remaining supporters of the Jianwen emperor, often through brutal tortures and mass executions, ensuring that no challenge to his stolen throne could ever emerge. The horrifying power struggles surrounding imperial succession were not always about civil war. Often, they played out in the secretive, treacherous environment of the Forbidden City, involving empresses, concubines, powerful eunuchs, and ambitious civil officials, all vying for influence over the emperor and the choice of heir. You witness the constant jockeying for position among the imperial consorts, each trying to elevate her son to the position of crown prince, knowing that her own power and security, and that of her clan, depended entirely on her son becoming emperor. This often led to bitter rivalries, accusations of witchcraft, and even suspected assassinations within the private confines of the harem. It's like watching a brutal, hidden game of Survivor, where the immunity idol is the emperor's favor, and the penalty for losing is death. An intriguing, yet dark detail is the Ming Dynasty's practice of funeral sacrifices, zunwang for some emperors, although officially banned by the Hongwu emperor. The practice of burying concubines alive or forcing them to commit suicide to accompany the deceased emperor into the afterlife resurfaced under some later Ming rulers. While not directly a succession struggle, it underscores the terrifying power of imperial death and the arbitrary cruelty that could be inflicted on palace women, especially those who had produced no heir. Later Ming emperors, often faced with a lack of a clear eldest son, further complicated succession. You observe instances where emperors, either due to long reigns, early deaths of heirs, or personal preferences, procrastinated naming an heir or favored a younger son over an elder. This indecision created dangerous power vacuums, allowing ambitious factions of eunuchs, civil officials, and imperial relatives to form around different potential heirs, leading to bitter feuds and political purges once the emperor finally passed away. The ambiguity of the succession often led to a scramble for power that inevitably involved bribery, intrigue, and violence. The brutal truth is that the Ming imperial succession, despite its seemingly clear rules, was a constant source of profound instability and bloodshed. The emperor's absolute power meant that whoever controlled his ear, or whoever could seize the throne by force, could reshape the entire empire. This often led to a terrifying cycle of usurpation, brutal purges to consolidate power, and then a new generation of internal threats emerging from within the victorious faction. The horrifying power struggles were not just political, they were deeply personal. Familial betrayals that tore at the very fabric of the ruling house. weakening the dynasty from its core and leaving a lasting legacy of fear and mistrust within the Forbidden City. You now zero in on one of the most chilling periods of the Ming Dynasty, a time when the insidious rise of eunuch power culminated in the terrifying reign of a single individual, Grand Eunuch Wei Zhongxian. You observe his ascent from humble origins to become a de facto ruler, wielding absolute power with such corruption and cruelty that he brought the once mighty dynasty to its knees from within. You feel the pervasive terror that gripped the empire, where loyalty was bought. Dissent was crushed with horrifying efficiency, and the emperor himself became little more than a puppet. This is the horrifying truth of unchecked power. Wei Zhongxian begins his career as a relatively minor eunuch in the Imperial palace. You see him as ambitious, ruthless, and possessing an uncanny ability to identify and exploit weaknesses in the court system. His rise is largely due to his alliance with Madame K, the wet nurse of the future Tianqi emperor. As the young prince grows up, Wei Zhongxian cultivates a close relationship with him, becoming his trusted confidant and companion, effectively acting as a surrogate father figure. This intimate access to the future emperor proves to be his ultimate key to power. It's like watching a seemingly insignificant courtier slowly, meticulously, worm his way into the highest favor, knowing that one day his youthful charge will wear the crown. When the Tianqi emperor ascends the throne in 1620, he is a young man, largely uninterested in governance and more concerned with carpentry and craftsmanship. This disinterest, combined with his deep personal loyalty to Wei Zhongxian, creates a catastrophic power vacuum. You witness Wei Zhongxian seize this opportunity with terrifying efficiency. He quickly consolidates control over the Eastern Depot Dongcheng and the Western Depot Xicheng, the dreaded secret police agencies you recall from earlier discussions. This gives him unparalleled instruments of repression and surveillance, allowing him to bypass the traditional civil bureaucracy entirely. He effectively controls all information flowing to the emperor, filtering out criticism and promoting his own agenda. Wei Zhongxian quickly establishes a reign of terror. You feel the chilling grip of his power spreading across the empire. Officials who dare to oppose him are summarily arrested, imprisoned, tortured, and executed on trumped-up charges. You see the widespread purges of the Donglin faction, a group of upright scholar officials who advocated for honest governance and criticized eunuch corruption. Thousands are dismissed from office, banished, or killed, often along with their families, in a systematic effort to eliminate all opposition. This brutal suppression of dissent silences critical voices and leaves the government staffed by sycophants and cronies loyal only to Wei. It's like watching a ruthless corporate takeover, where the new CEO fires everyone who disagrees with them and replaces them with puppets. His corruption is legendary and staggering. You observe how Wei Zhongxian uses his absolute power to amass an immense personal fortune through embezzlement, bribery, and the sale of official positions. Provincial governors and military commanders are forced to pay exorbitant fees to secure their appointments, and then recoup their losses by extorting the populace, creating a vast network of corruption that siphons wealth from the common people and enriches Wei and his loyalists. He controls lucrative state monopolies and levies extra-legal taxes, all enriching his private coffers. You feel the crushing burden on the ordinary citizens, suffering under the weight of this systemic graft. The horrifying truth of Wei Zhongxian's reign is the extent of his megalomania and the cult of personality he fostered around himself. He had temples dedicated to him, statues erected in his honor across the empire, and officials were forced to kneel and worship before his effigies. He was publicly hailed as 9,000 years old, a reference to the emperor's 10,000 years old, indicating he was almost as important as the emperor. You see the absolute degradation of imperial authority, as the Son of Heaven himself becomes a mere figurehead. While real power resides with a castrated servant, this public humiliation of the imperial image deeply damaged the Ming Dynasty's prestige and legitimacy in the eyes of its people. Historians still debate whether the Tianqi emperor was genuinely unaware of Wei Zhongxian's excesses, or if he simply chose to tolerate them due to his disinterest in governance and his personal attachment to the eunuch. Wei Zhongxian's arrogance and unchecked power led to disastrous governance. You witness the decline in military effectiveness, as generals appointed through bribery rather than merit led to defeats against external threats. The economy suffers under rampant corruption and excessive taxation, leading to widespread social unrest. Crucial repairs to the Great Wall are neglected, and vital flood control projects are underfunded, directly contributing to future natural disasters and popular rebellions. He was too busy building his own personal empire to effectively govern the actual empire. An intriguing, yet chilling detail is the use of eunuch armies during Wei Zhongxian's ascendancy. He cultivated personal military forces, separate from the regular imperial army, composed of eunuchs and their loyal followers. These forces, often used to enforce his will and eliminate opponents, underscore the terrifying extent of his power and his complete distrust of the traditional military command structure. This further fragmented loyalty and weakened the overall defense of the empire. However, Wei Zhongxian's reign of terror is ultimately built on a fragile foundation, the life of the young Tianqi emperor. When the Tianqi emperor dies prematurely in 1627, his younger brother, Zhu Yujian, ascends the throne as the Chongzhen emperor. You observe the young Chongzhen emperor, intelligent and determined, who immediately understands the catastrophic threat posed by Wei Zhongxian. He is a man of strong will, deeply committed to restoring proper governance. You witness the subtle yet credibly dangerous cat and mouse game between the new emperor and the entrenched, powerful eunuch, Chongzhen, knowing the vast network of Wei Zhongxian's spies and loyalists. Carefully plans his moves. He slowly builds support among trusted officials, isolating Wei Zhongxian's allies and subtly shifting the balance of power. Finally, he strikes. In 1627, Chongzhen orders Wei Zhongxian's removal from office. You feel the collective gasp of relief across the empire. As the tyrannical eunuch is finally unseated, Wei Zhongxian attempts to flee, but he is eventually disgraced and ordered to commit suicide. You see his humiliating end, a swift reversal of fortune that mirrors the brutality he inflicted on others. His vast fortune is confiscated, and his loyalists are purged. However, the damage he inflicted on the Ming Dynasty is profound and irreparable. The horrifying power struggles epitomized by Wei Zhongxian's reign demonstrate the fatal flaw within the Ming's centralized autocratic system. When the emperor was weak or disengaged, the vast power vacuum could be filled by those closest to him. Specifically the eunuchs, their unchecked authority, fueled by corruption and unchecked terror, systematically hollowed out the foundations of the empire, alienated the bureaucracy, oppressed the populace, and left the dynasty severely weakened and vulnerable to the external and internal threats that would ultimately lead to its brutal fall. The legacy of Wei Zhongxian is a chilling testament to how a single individual, wielding power through fear and manipulation, can bring a seemingly powerful empire to the brink of collapse. You now turn your gaze beyond the gilded walls of the Forbidden City to the vast, turbulent borders of the Ming Dynasty and witness the relentless struggle against external threats. This isn't just a story of occasional skirmishes. It's a centuries-long saga of constant pressure from Mongols, a resurgent threat of pirates along the coasts, and the immense financial and human cost of defending a vast empire. You feel the relentless strain on the dynasty's resources, the constant anxiety of invasion, and the horrifying realization that even a powerful empire can be bled dry by persistent external pressures. This is a disturbing truth that weakened the Ming from without, even as it was plagued by internal power struggles. The primary and most enduring external threat to the Ming dynasty came from the Mongols. You recall that the Ming was founded by overthrowing the Mongol Yuan dynasty. While the Mongols were driven from China proper, they remained a formidable force on the northern steppes, constantly probing the Ming defenses. You observe the Ming Emperor's obsession with securing their northern border, primarily through the ambitious and continuous construction of the Great Wall. This isn't the single, unified wall often imagined. It's a vast network of fortifications, watchtowers, and garrisons, built and rebuilt over centuries, a testament to the immense fear the Mongols inspired. You feel the biting winds of the northern frontier, the harsh conditions endured by the soldiers, and the endless demand for resources to maintain this monumental defensive line. It's like building an endless, incredibly expensive security fence. Only the threat on the other side is still very real and very powerful, despite the Great Wall. The Mongols were a persistent nuisance, often launching raids into Ming territory, looting villages, kidnapping citizens, and disrupting trade. You witness the constant military engagements, the need for large standing armies on the frontier, and the strategic dilemmas faced by Ming generals. This constant state of low-intensity warfare drained the imperial treasury and diverted manpower from other crucial areas, such as internal development or naval defense. A particularly horrifying scandal demonstrating the Ming's vulnerability to the Mongols occurred in 1449, known as the Tumu Crisis. You observe Emperor Zhengtong, a young and naive ruler, being manipulated by his powerful and corrupt eunuch, Wang Zhen, despite having no military experience. Convinced the emperor to personally lead a massive army of 500,000 men against a smaller, more mobile Oirat Mongol force led by Esen Taishi. You feel the catastrophic arrogance and incompetence that led to this disaster. The Ming army, poorly led and supplied, was ambushed at Tumu Fortress. It was a complete rout. The Ming forces were annihilated, and most shockingly, Emperor Zhengtong himself was captured by the Mongols. You feel the immense shame and humiliation that gripped the Ming court. The Son of Heaven, captured by barbarians, was an unprecedented catastrophe. This event fundamentally undermined the emperor's prestige and the dynasty's image of invincibility. While the Ming eventually recovered, the emperor was later released, and his brother briefly took the throne, preventing a total collapse. The Tumu Crisis highlighted the dangerous influence of corrupt eunuchs and the fragility of even a mighty empire when faced with a capable external foe and internal incompetence. It's like watching a seemingly invincible sports team suffer a humiliating defeat orchestrated by their own incompetent coach. Beyond the Mongols, the Ming faced a different kind of external threat from the coastal pirates, or woku, while often referred to as Japanese pirates. These groups were often composed of a mix of Japanese, Chinese, and Korean desperados, engaged in smuggling, raiding, and illegal trade. You witness their terrifying raids along China's southeastern coast, plundering wealthy port cities and agricultural hinterlands. You feel the terror of the coastal populations, living under constant threat, and the frustration of Ming officials struggling to combat these elusive, fast-moving raiders. The Ming government's response to the woku was often inconsistent and ultimately inadequate. You see periods of vigorous naval campaigns and coastal defenses, followed by periods of neglect and internal focus. The Ming's policy of maritime prohibition, largely a response to the woku threat and an attempt to control foreign trade, inadvertently fueled the piracy, as legitimate merchants were driven to illegal activities. This creates a vicious cycle where government policy inadvertently exacerbates the very problem it seeks to solve. This disturbing truth of unintended consequences haunts Ming maritime policy, an intriguing, yet often overlooked detail is the Ming Dynasty's decision to effectively abandon their grand naval expeditions after the early 15th century. You recall the magnificent voyages of Zheng He, the eunuch admiral who led massive treasure fleets across the Indian Ocean, reaching as far as East Africa. These expeditions showcased Ming naval power and diplomatic reach. However, after Zheng He's death and the changing priorities of later emperors, these voyages were abruptly halted. the ships allowed to rot, and the records destroyed. This self-imposed isolation, driven partly by the cost of northern defense and a Confucian disdain for overseas trade, left the Ming vulnerable to coastal threats and disconnected from the rapidly evolving global maritime world. A critical misstep that had long-term consequences. The constant external pressures had a profound impact on the Ming Dynasty. They drained the imperial treasury, forcing emperors to levy heavier taxes on the populace, which contributed to widespread discontent and, eventually, internal rebellions. They also diverted vital military resources and manpower from other parts of the empire, weakening the government's ability to respond to natural disasters or internal unrest. The military, constantly engaged in defensive operations, often became corrupt and inefficient. Further compounding the problem, the horrifying power struggles within the Ming court often exacerbated these external threats. Corrupt eunuchs like Wang Zhen, or later, Wei Zhongxian, often made disastrous military decisions or embezzled funds meant for border defense, leaving the empire vulnerable. The endless infighting between eunuchs and civil officials meant that effective, unified strategies to address external threats were often delayed or undermined. The empire was fighting itself, even as it fought its external enemies. By the later Ming period, the combination of relentless Mongol pressure, persistent coastal piracy, and the internal rot of corruption and power struggles had severely weakened the dynasty. The Great Wall, while a formidable symbol, could not protect against systemic decay. The emperors, often isolated in the Forbidden City, struggled to comprehend the true extent of the threats, or were simply too disengaged to act decisively. The disturbing truth about the Ming Dynasty's struggle against external threats is that, while they faced formidable adversaries, their ultimate vulnerability often stemmed from their own internal weaknesses and strategic missteps. The constant draining of resources, the exposure of imperial incompetence, and the breakdown of effective governance under the weight of internal power struggles, all contributed to a slow, agonizing decline. The Ming Dynasty, once a symbol of renewed Chinese power, found itself increasingly besieged, setting the stage for its final devastating collapse. You now delve into the treacherous, shadow-laden world of the Ming imperial court, where the pursuit of power was a constant, deadly game. This isn't just about political maneuvering, it's about the ever-present threat of court intrigue and assassinations. A horrifying reality that consumed emperors, officials, and palace women alike. You feel the chilling paranoia that permeated the Forbidden City, knowing that a whispered rumor, a slight misstep, or a perceived threat could lead to a swift, brutal end, often shrouded in mystery. This is a disturbing truth that made survival itself an art form within the Ming inner circle. The Ming Dynasty, despite its centralized power, was a hotbed of factions. You observe the perennial rivalry between the traditional civil officials, the literati, trained in Confucian philosophy and aspiring to honest governance, and the powerful, often corrupt, eunuch faction, who controlled access to the emperor and wielded immense administrative power. This fundamental cleavage created a constant environment of suspicion and plotting. Each side sought to undermine the other, to gain imperial favor, and to ensure their allies held key positions. You feel the intense, often deadly, competition for influence, where political debates could quickly escalate into fatal accusations. It's like watching two powerful mafia families constantly trying to outmaneuver each other. But the prize is control of an entire empire. The emperor, though absolute in theory, was often at the center of this web of intrigue. His personal character, whether diligent or indolent, trusting or paranoid, heavily influenced who gained ascendancy. A weak or disengaged emperor meant that power would inevitably flow to those closest to him, particularly the eunuchs, leading to unchecked abuses and the systematic elimination of critics. A strong emperor, conversely, might unleash terrifying purges to assert his own will, as the Hongwu Emperor did, or as the Yongle Emperor did after his usurpation. Assassination, or the suspicion thereof, was a terrifying tool in this power struggle. While direct, overt assassinations of emperors were rare. The sudden, mysterious deaths of high-ranking officials, imperial princes, or even palace women were often attributed to foul play. You hear the whispers of poison, of secret stranglings, or of accidental falls, all designed to remove an inconvenient rival or to prevent a perceived threat. The lack of independent investigation meant that official explanations were often accepted, even when widely disbelieved by those within the court. One famous example of rumored assassination, though unproven, surrounds the death of the Wanli Emperor's favored concubine, Lady Zheng's son, who was a contender for the succession. While officially attributed to illness, many suspected foul play from rival factions who feared Lady Zheng's influence. This type of private intrigue within the imperial harem could have enormous consequences. Shaping the future of the dynasty, the competition among concubines to have their sons named crown prince was often brutal, involving bribery, black magic, and deadly plots. You feel the intense pressure on these women, whose entire lives revolved around gaining and maintaining imperial favor for themselves and their offspring. The horrifying truth is that the emperor's vast power, combined with his physical seclusion within the Forbidden City, created an ideal environment for unchecked intrigue. Those closest to the emperor, his eunuchs, his concubines, his personal attendants, had unparalleled access and opportunity to manipulate him, control information, or even harm those who stood in their way. The security of the palace, designed to protect the emperor, inadvertently made him a prisoner of his own court, often surrounded by those with the most to gain from his manipulation or even his demise. It's like being the most powerful person in the world, but your closest advisors are all secretly trying to undermine each other. And you might be next. The secret police organizations, such as the Eastern Depot and Western Depot, played a crucial role in these power struggles, controlled by powerful eunuchs. These agencies were used not just to root out external threats, but more often, to eliminate political rivals within the court. You witness their terrifying methods: arbitrary arrests, prolonged torture to extract false confessions, and summary executions. No official, no matter how high-ranking, was safe if they incurred the wrath of a powerful eunuch director. You feel the pervasive climate of fear, where silence and feigned loyalty were often the only paths to survival. Denunciations were common, often based on flimsy evidence, and once arrested, few escaped the depot's clutches. Depots, an intriguing yet chilling detail is the Ming Dynasty's use of memorials, official reports, and petitions to the emperor as weapons in court intrigue. Officials would write lengthy memorials, sometimes criticizing the emperor's policies or powerful eunuchs, knowing that these could be intercepted or misinterpreted. The eunuchs would often filter or distort these memorials, making the emperor believe his loyal officials were disloyal, or vice versa. This manipulation of communication created an environment of profound mistrust, where the emperor often couldn't distinguish loyal advice from treacherous plotting, leading to the wrongful punishment of many honest officials. The consequences of this rampant court intrigue were devastating for the dynasty. It led to paralysis of governance. Constant infighting meant that critical decisions were delayed. Important reforms were never implemented, and effective responses to external threats or internal crises were often undermined by factionalism. Loss of competent officials. The purges eliminated many talented and honest officials, leaving the government increasingly staffed by incompetent sycophants who prioritized loyalty to a powerful faction over effective administration. Erosion of imperial authority. The sight of emperors being manipulated by eunuchs, or officials being brutally purged, chipped away at the legitimacy and prestige of the Ming throne in the eyes of the populace. The disturbing truth about the horrifying power struggles and assassinations within the Ming court is that they were a self-inflicted wound. The highly centralized, autocratic system, combined with the emperor's increasing isolation and reliance on eunuchs, inadvertently created an environment where the greatest threats to the dynasty came not from external invaders, but from within its own imperial walls. The relentless ambition and casual cruelty practiced by those closest to power, constantly vying for imperial favor, ultimately hollowed out the foundations of the empire, leaving it vulnerable to the rebellions and external invasions that would eventually bring about its brutal fall. You now turn your attention to a phenomenon that tragically accelerated the Ming Dynasty's decline, the rise of wandering emperors. Rulers who retreated into lives of indolence and isolation, leaving the vast empire vulnerable to the unchecked power of eunuchs, corrupt officials, and ultimately, external and internal collapse. You feel the profound frustration and despair of loyal officials, watching their mighty empire slowly rot from the inside out, while their supreme ruler remained locked away in a gilded cage of his own making. This is a horrifying truth about the consequences of absolute power combined with profound disengagement. You recall that the Ming Dynasty began with the Hongwu Emperor, a meticulous and ruthless ruler who centralized power. His successor, the Yongle Emperor, was equally active and engaged, personally leading military campaigns and overseeing the construction of the Forbidden City. However, as generations passed, and the dynasty became more entrenched and outwardly stable, many later Ming emperors became increasingly disengaged from the daily affairs of governance. The most notorious example of this phenomenon is the Wanli Emperor, reigned 1572-1620, one of the longest reigning emperors in Chinese history. You witness his early years, initially diligent and advised by capable grand secretaries like Zhang Zhuzheng. But after Zhang Zhuzheng's death, the Wanli Emperor undergoes a dramatic transformation. He retreats almost entirely from public life, refusing to hold regular court audiences, to meet with his officials, or to read the vast numbers of memorials, official reports, and petitions that piled up daily. You see him secluded within the Forbidden City, living a life of luxury and indulgence, often spending his time on personal hobbies, lavish construction projects, or the affairs of his harem. It's like watching the CEO of a massive corporation simply stop showing up to work, letting the company run itself, or rather, let others run it for him. This imperial indolence creates a catastrophic power vacuum at the heart of the Ming government. You observe how the responsibility for daily governance falls to those who have direct access to the emperor, primarily the eunuchs. Without regular audiences, officials cannot receive imperial decrees or provide direct counsel. The eunuchs become the sole conduit of information to and from the emperor, allowing them to filter, distort, or suppress memorials at will. This unchecked power leads directly to the rampant corruption and tyranny of figures like Wei Zhongxian, who effectively ruled the empire in the emperor's stead. As you recall from earlier, the horrifying truth of these wandering emperors is that their extreme isolation and disengagement were not merely personal failings. They had devastating systemic consequences for the entire empire. Paralysis of government. Without the emperor's direct engagement, crucial decisions were delayed indefinitely. Promotions and appointments were stalled, leaving vital government positions empty for years. This administrative paralysis crippled the government's ability to respond effectively to mounting crises, whether external invasions, natural disasters, or internal rebellions. Rampant corruption. With the emperor disengaged, there was no ultimate check on the power of eunuchs and corrupt officials. They could operate with impunity, extorting wealth, selling offices, and embezzling funds on a vast scale, knowing that the emperor would likely not intervene, or would only hear their side of the story. Loss of morale among officials. Honest and capable civil officials, dedicated to serving the empire, became deeply disillusioned and frustrated. Their memorials went unread, their warnings ignored, and their careers often ended by the machinations of corrupt eunuchs. Many simply resigned in despair, further depleting the government of talent. You feel their bitter frustration, watching their life's work being undermined by imperial indifference, the Wanli Emperor's prolonged absence from court, which lasted for nearly 3 decades, directly contributed to the weakening of the Ming Dynasty from within. Money was wasted on lavish personal projects, military defenses were neglected, and the burden on the common people through increased taxes and corruption grew unbearable. Other later Ming emperors also exhibited similar patterns of disengagement, though perhaps not to the extreme of Wanli. You see emperors who were more interested in personal hobbies, some obsessed with alchemy, others with building miniature structures, than with the immense responsibilities of governing a vast empire. This retreat into personal obsessions created a dangerous cycle the more the emperor withdrew. The more power devolved to the eunuchs and other factions, further alienating the civil officials and exacerbating corruption. An intriguing, yet somber detail is the contrast between the Ming emperor's almost divine status and their very human failings. They were revered as the Son of Heaven, intermediaries between the celestial and earthly realms, yet many were tragically ill-suited to the immense burdens of their office. The system they inherited, which concentrated absolute power in their hands, ironically left them vulnerable to their own weaknesses and desires, turning their celestial authority into an earthly trap. The disturbing truth that these emperors were often literally prisoners of their own design, confined within the forbidden city, underscores their isolation. They lived lives of unimaginable luxury, waited on by thousands of servants, but cut off from direct contact with the outside world. Their primary source of information was filtered through eunuchs, and their only companions were often their palace women and favored attendants. This profound isolation fostered a detachment from reality that proved fatal for the dynasty. Historians still debate whether these emperors were genuinely incapable of ruling, or if their retreats were a form of psychological escapism from the crushing pressures of an impossible office and the relentless internal power struggles. The cumulative effect of these wandering emperors' indolence and isolation was catastrophic. The Ming Dynasty, once vibrant and formidable, gradually lost its administrative efficiency, its military strength, and its popular legitimacy. The central government became paralyzed, unable to address the burgeoning threats of widespread famine, peasant rebellions, and the rising power of the Manchu tribes to the north. The emperors, by their very absence from active governance, inadvertently allowed the seeds of their dynasty's destruction to germinate and grow. By the early to mid-17th century, the Ming Dynasty, though outwardly still grand, was a hollowed-out shell. The devastating legacy of the wandering emperor's disengagement meant that when the final crises arrived, there was no strong, decisive imperial hand to guide the empire through the storm. Their retreat into personal oblivion directly paved the way for the terrifying waves of rebellion and invasion that would ultimately bring about the brutal fall of the Ming. You now arrive at the terrifying final chapter of the Ming Dynasty, witnessing its agonizing descent into chaos, marked by widespread famine, peasant rebellions, and the ultimate horrifying collapse under immense internal and external pressures. This isn't a gradual decline, it's a brutal, accelerating implosion as centuries of power struggles, corruption, and imperial neglect finally converge to shatter a once mighty empire. You feel the profound despair of a populace suffering unimaginable hardship, the desperate fury of rebels, and the chilling finality of dynastic collapse. This is the horrifying truth of an empire devoured by its own internal rot. The early to mid-17th century sees a confluence of devastating factors that push the Ming Dynasty to its breaking point. You observe the compounding crises, climate change, and natural disasters. A period known as the Little Ice Age brings colder temperatures, leading to widespread crop failures. You witness devastating droughts followed by catastrophic floods. particularly in the Yellow River Basin, which cripple agricultural production. Famine becomes rampant across vast swathes of China. You see starving peasants abandoning their lands, resorting to cannibalism in some desperate areas, and dying by the millions. This widespread suffering forms the initial, unbearable burden on the populace. It's like watching a series of biblical plagues descend upon an already struggling land. Epidemics amidst the famine and displacement. Devastating epidemics, possibly including plague, sweep across the country. You feel the horror of disease spreading unchecked, wiping out entire villages and further depleting the population and weakening the state's ability to respond. These natural disasters are exacerbated by the Ming government's profound administrative incompetence and corruption. You recall the rampant power of the eunuchs, the disengagement of the wandering emperors, and the systemic graft that siphoned off vast sums of money from the imperial treasury. Funds meant for dike repairs, famine relief, or military provisions are embezzled or mismanaged. You see how the government's inability to effectively respond to the suffering of its people fuels widespread resentment and disillusionment. The taxes, already high, become an unbearable burden on starving peasants, pushing them to desperation. This intolerable suffering ignites a series of massive peasant rebellions. You witness the rise of charismatic, ruthless rebel leaders who harness the raw fury of the starving populace. The most prominent of these is Li Zicheng, a former postal courier whose job was eliminated by government cutbacks. He gathers a vast army of dispossessed peasants, jobless artisans, and disgruntled soldiers. You feel the revolutionary fervor, the desperate hope for change, mixed with the inherent brutality of a starving mob. Li Zicheng's forces grow exponentially, sweeping across northern China, capturing cities and provinces with surprising speed. The Ming Imperial Army, already weakened by corruption, neglect, and the ongoing struggle against the Manchus to the north, proves largely ineffective against these internal rebellions. You see widespread desertion, poor morale, and commanders who are often appointed through bribery rather than merit. The Dynasty, which had once commanded such formidable military power, is now unable to defend itself from within. The very military system that upheld the empire now crumbles under internal pressure. An intriguing, yet horrifying detail is the Ming government's desperate and often self-defeating fiscal policies during this period to pay for wars and palace expenses. The government debased its currency, leading to hyperinflation, and imposed ever-increasing taxes on a populace that had nothing left to give. This further fueled discontent and pushed more people into the arms of the rebels. It's like trying to put out a fire by pouring gasoline on it, while the Ming is battling internal collapse. The Manchus, a powerful tribal confederation from Manchuria, modern-day northeast China, are growing stronger to the north. You recall their constant pressure on the Ming borders, under their formidable leader, Hong Taiji, and later his son. The Manchus systematically unify their own tribes, adopt Chinese administrative practices, and build a powerful, disciplined army, poised to exploit the Ming's internal chaos. The Ming generals on the northern frontier, particularly Wu Songui, find themselves in an impossible position, caught between a crumbling empire and a powerful external threat. The horrifying truth of the Ming collapse is that it was not simply overthrown by a single, powerful enemy. It was consumed by a multifaceted crisis, the relentless pressure of famine and disease, the government's catastrophic inability to respond, and the resulting explosion of peasant fury. The internal rot caused by centuries of power struggles, imperial indolence, and unchecked eunuch corruption left the dynasty hollowed out. Unable to withstand the final blows, it's a tragic testament to how an empire can be its own worst enemy. In April 1644, the peasant rebel army led by Li Zicheng marches on Beijing, the imperial capital. You witness the final, agonizing moments of the Ming Dynasty. The city's defenses are weak, its soldiers demoralized, and its people starving. The Imperial Guard, depleted and often unpaid, offers little resistance. Li Zicheng's forces easily breach the city walls. You observe the last Ming Emperor, the Chongzhen Emperor, a diligent but ultimately ineffective ruler who had desperately tried to reverse the dynasty's decline. Faced with the capture of his capital and the utter collapse of his authority, he attempts to convince his family to flee. As the rebels storm the Forbidden City, he famously goes to Jingshan Hill, behind the palace, and hangs himself from a tree. Along with his chief eunuch, he leaves a note lamenting his inability to save the empire and begging his people not to harm his subjects. You feel the profound pathos of his end, a tragic symbol of a dynasty consumed by its own failings. It's a stark, solitary death for a man who once held absolute power, but who lost control of everything. The fall of Beijing marks the brutal end of the Ming Dynasty. However, the story doesn't end with Li Zicheng's victory. The Ming general Wu Sangui, defending the Shanhai Pass against the Manchus, makes a fateful decision. Faced with the choice of allying with the peasant rebels whom he despised, or the Manchus who were foreign invaders, he chooses to open the Great Wall's gates to the Manchu army. You feel the immense, cynical irony of this moment. The very wall built to keep the Manchus out now allows them to march into a broken China. Wu Sangui and the Manchus then crush Li Zicheng's rebel forces, effectively ushering in a new foreign dynasty. The Qing, the final horrifying truth of the Ming collapse, is this ultimate betrayal and the ensuing bloody transition. The dynasty was not just overthrown by external forces, it was hollowed out by internal strife, exhausted by relentless famines and rebellions, and finally delivered into the hands of a new conqueror by its own desperate, disillusioned general. The horrifying power struggles that marked its beginning, ironically, consumed it from within, leaving a legacy of profound suffering and a nation ready for a new foreign rule. You now arrive at the final reflection on the Ming Dynasty, contemplating its legacy of paradox and ultimate decline. After nearly 3 centuries of rule, marked by unparalleled grandeur, cultural flourishing, and horrifying power struggles, the Ming collapsed in a brutal and devastating fashion. You feel the complex weight of their history, a tapestry woven with threads of innovation and stagnation, enlightenment and brutal oppression. This is the horrifying truth that an empire's internal weaknesses can be far more destructive than any external enemy. The Ming Dynasty, at its zenith, was a truly formidable empire. You recall its immense achievements: restoration of Han Chinese rule. After a century of Mongol domination, the Ming restored traditional Chinese governance, culture, and social order. This deeply resonated with the populace, cultural and artistic brilliance. You remember the flourishing of porcelain production. Ming porcelain is world-renowned. Painting, literature like the great novels, Journey to the West and Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and philosophy. The Forbidden City itself stands as a testament to their architectural and artistic grandeur. Naval power and exploration. You recall the magnificent voyages of Zheng He in the early 15th century, showcasing China's technological prowess and diplomatic reach. Even if these ventures were later abandoned, economic prosperity early and mid-period for much of its reign. The Ming oversaw periods of significant agricultural production, bustling internal trade, and the influx of New World silver that fueled a thriving economy. However, beneath this impressive facade lay the seeds of its own destruction. A series of horrifying power struggles and systemic flaws that became increasingly debilitating over time. Centralized autocracy and imperial isolation. You recall the Hongwu Emperor's extreme centralization of power, abolishing the Grand Counselor, and later, emperors retreat into the seclusion of the Forbidden City. This created a system where the emperor's personal character dictated the empire's fate, and where absolute power could lead to absolute paralysis or unchecked tyranny by those closest to the throne. Particularly the eunuchs, the eunuch problem. You witness the terrifying ascent of eunuch power, their control over information, their command of secret police eastern and western depots, and their rampant corruption. The bitter, often violent. Rivalry between eunuchs and civil officials consistently undermined effective governance, draining resources and talent. This was arguably the most insidious internal rot that plagued the dynasty for much of its later period. Brutal succession struggles. You recall the Jingnan campaign, a devastating civil war fought over the throne, and the constant, often deadly, intrigue surrounding imperial succession, fueled by ambitious factions within the Forbidden City. These internal conflicts bled the dynasty of resources and stability, lack of institutional adaptability. The Ming Dynasty, despite its long reign, proved remarkably resistant to fundamental reform. Its rigid bureaucratic system, combined with a Confucian emphasis on tradition, struggled to adapt to new challenges, whether from external threats, economic shifts, or social changes. Neglect of external threats while expending vast resources on the Great Wall and fighting Mongols. The Ming often failed to develop a cohesive long-term strategy, particularly against the growing Manchu threat. Their inconsistent maritime policies also left them vulnerable to pirates and isolated them from the changing global landscape. The horrifying truth that defines the Ming's ultimate collapse is that it was largely a self-inflicted wound. The empire, despite its immense size and wealth, was hollowed out by centuries of internal strife, corruption, and an increasingly dysfunctional central government. When confronted with the combined pressures of severe climate change, famine, and disease, and widespread peasant rebellions, the imperial structure, weakened from within, simply imploded. The final blow from the Manchus was delivered to an empire already on its knees, a testament to the fact that an empire can succumb to its own internal pathologies more effectively than any external enemy. An intriguing, yet somber detail about the Ming's legacy is the stark contrast between its early outward-looking policy, Zheng He's voyages, and its later, self-imposed maritime prohibition Haijin. This policy, meant to control coastal piracy and prevent foreign influence, effectively isolated China from the burgeoning global trade networks and technological advancements occurring in Europe. This decision, driven by internal political considerations and Confucian conservatism, left China strategically vulnerable in the long run and inadvertently contributed to its later relative decline compared to rising European powers. Historians still debate the precise motivations and long-term consequences of the Ming's maritime ban, but its role in China's historical trajectory is undeniable. The Ming Dynasty leaves behind a legacy of paradox. It was a period of immense growth and cultural brilliance, a high point in Chinese imperial history in many aspects. Yet, it was also a period of profound internal cruelty, political stagnation, and systematic corruption that ultimately led to its demise. The grand narratives of power and stability are always tempered by the horrifying truths of its internal power struggles. The silent terror of its secret police, the tragic lives of its emperors, and the suffering of its people. As you conclude your reflection on the Ming, you realize that their story is not merely a tale of a dynasty that fell. It's a powerful cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked centralized power, the corrosive effects of unchecked ambition, and the devastating consequences when a ruling elite becomes utterly detached from the realities of its people. The horrifying power struggles of the Ming Dynasty serve as a potent, enduring reminder that even the most formidable empires can be consumed by their own internal darkness, leaving behind a legacy that is both magnificent and deeply unsettling. The echoes of imperial grandeur and internal conflict now gently recede, the rustle of silk and the distant cries of a fallen dynasty dissolving into the quiet hum of the fan. You drift away from the vast Forbidden City and the battlefields of a crumbling empire, leaving the Ming to their complex legacy, their triumphs and their terrifying struggles, finally settled into the annals of history. The grand, yet often horrifying. Tale of their dynasty concludes, allowing you to settle into the peaceful depths of slumber. All the power, all the pathos, all the brutality now melts into the quiet night.